Um, we're excited that you're all here. We had a lot of people that signed up, and we know that this is being recorded, so you can go back and reference this or send it to other people that might be interested in benefit. My name is Nanette Odell. I am technically the ADA coordinator for the Phoenix Suns and the Arizona Diamondbacks. I've lived and or worked with people with disabilities literally my entire life. And I used to work actually with Michele with the city of Phoenix. So Michele, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Michele Stokes. I'm the Tempe ADA Compliance Specialist. I've been working in the disability area for about 30 years and love what I get to do. Nanette?
All right. So we titled this Help. I just became the ADA coordinator. Now what? And so as we go through this, I do want to say real quick that many of these slides that we have here came from Shannon, who is the ADA coordinator for Fresno. We were very happy that she was willing to share these and let us kind of touch them up a little bit with things. I want to tell you guys a little bit more about the Arizona ADA Coordinator Coalition. I know some of you on the list that I can see here are already a part of the coalition. If you are not, we would be absolutely happy to add you to our list. Please know that we do not send this out. In fact, I've actually had some contractors and attorneys ask for my list, and I refuse to give it to them because we really want to keep this very internal for us, and we want you to have a safe place and not be spammed. But when we started the coalition, Ken Jacuzzi and I actually started the coalition back in 2008. Unfortunately, Ken has since passed on. But the mission that we had then and that we now carry on is that the coalition's purpose is to develop an ongoing collaborative network of ADA coordination that offers support through continuous education, sharing of resources, expertise, and best practices. Ken and I put on an ADA conference back in 2009, and we're going to be putting on our next conference this next year. 11 years later, I promise it won't be another 11 years before the third one. But we do hope that you can join us for that. As we talk about being an ADA coordinator, some people get confused about the different titles. And so just to go over them really quickly, Title I is employment, Title II, state and local government, Title III, public accommodations and commercial facilities, Title IV, telecommunications, and Title V, miscellaneous. And we're pretty much going to focus on Title II and III here primarily. Now, there's a lot of different people. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to achieve inclusion. And to be an ADA coordinator, a lot of times we find that we're sort of the only one of our breed within our organization. That makes it rather difficult sometimes because sometimes we can be a little bit misunderstood. Ideally, in an environment, you're going to have the ADA coordinator. You're going to have ADA liaisons. We're going to talk more about that. You're going to have organizational leaders. That's very important. You want the disability community involved, and that means working with different disability organizations. The coalition, obviously, we're here as a resource to you. Oftentimes, you need to bring in third-party consultants. Obviously, the Department of Justice, they're the ones that enforce the law. But with that, along with that, of course, is the ADA National Network. And in fact, I was just on the phone with someone from the Pacific ADA Center before our conference started here, and they're very interested in helping Arizona with our coalition and to act as a resource. We're very excited about that. One thing they want to make sure that I mentioned was that they are a confidential resource for you. And so I think sometimes we get a little bit nervous about calling somebody and asking for help, but they're here as a confidential and unbiased resource. And then the last thing is a lot of times you may have coordinators. So again, it takes a lot of people. Now, one of the things that both Michele and I want to mention is that these are our opinions. We don't want anybody to think this is official legal advice or anything. So there's our little spiel on that. Michele's going to talk a little bit more about some of the resources that are available through the Department of Justice.
Yes, it's very nice that they put together an action guide that helps us do these things. The New England ADA Center provides this one. There are 9 different ADA centers, and each one has a slightly different focus. A wealth, absolute wealth of knowledge, research. Don't have to reinvent anything. They have a lot of different links for tutorials, and they have Title II best practices. They have all kinds of employment-related policies and much, much more. Next slide. And it gives 7 steps for ADA Title II. I would rearrange them a little bit. You want the ADA coordinator before you start the implementation, but sometimes you're coming in after the fact, and so that's typical for most of us since it's been 30 years since the ADA was passed. The 7 steps basically are seven requirements that are there. Now, they're pretty basic, really, when you get into them. What they end up, the most important one, I think, is really your grievance procedure. If you don't have a complaint, sometimes you don't have a problem. But if you don't have a complaint, sometimes you have a lot of problems. It's just nobody's complaining about them. Nobody's letting you know that there's a problem, and people don't like to go down that road a lot of times. But it's something that is where you get your gas to get going. And I'll use that analogy throughout as a car. We have a map later on. But right now, when you get a grievance or you get a request or you get an inquiry, that gives you the impetus to go forward and make some changes, or to require a department to make changes. We don't do anything alone. That's the one thing that I've learned over 30 years. We do nothing by ourselves. It's really important that you create your liaison group, your advocacy group, that you know the people who can help you move things along. With that, Nanette, do you want to take it from there?
Well, I agree with you about starting implementation. I think what happens is sometimes something is started and then they go, oh my gosh, we had no idea what we were getting into and we need someone to come help. And that's when the ADA coordinator is hired. But we're going to talk about the implementation. And in the perfect world, the commitment is their civil rights, ADA. They already have an ADA coordinator. They have a great deal of experience. They have a rapport in the disability community. And they have the authority and the budget to administer these resources. That's, again, the perfect world. So please don't feel bad if you're not there. ADA coordinator also has a clear job description, and they have a clear chain of command. One of the things that is recommended by the Department of Justice, and I don't know that they put this in writing, but one of the reasons why I would highly recommend, if you can attend ADA conferences, the National ADA Symposium, it's going to be in Kansas this next year, but you have a chance to, like right there, you're talking to the Department of Justice. You're talking to the Access Board. And if you're a little bit confused about who they are, the Access Board wrote the law, and the Department of Justice enforces the law. And you can call either one of them if you have questions, or again, you can call one of the technical assistance centers. But either way, again, even if the Department of Justice doesn't necessarily list this, when you go to these conferences, you can really hear and gain a lot of information. So one of the things that I remember really stuck out to me one time was they were talking about where the position of the ADA coordinator is in relation to a city. So if they put the ADA person under HR, they become kind of a Title I person. And if they put the ADA coordinator under adaptive recreation, they become an adaptive recreation person. Really, ideally, the ADA coordinator is going to be somewhere under the city manager or somewhere in that structure, because they're supposed to be able to reach down into every department and have influence over every department. And so that's an important piece. Again, in a perfect world, you have liaisons from each department that are selected to be on the ADA team. And then you have outreach to the disability community that's already been established. However, this is not the perfect world. The real world says, uh-oh, I missed a meeting and I've been told I'm the ADA coordinator and I have no idea what that means. Or maybe you go, I think I'd like to be the ADA coordinator, sign me up. And it's funny because I have people oftentimes that want to come down to the ballpark or the arena and they say, I really want to be an ADA coordinator. And my first question is sort of, do you know much about what that means? And do you have really thick skin? Because you kind of have to have really thick skin to do this job. It is not an easy job. You will be a fairly unpopular person because essentially your job is to find problems and then to find solutions. And the solutions oftentimes mean that others need to either do something, they need to stop doing something, and they probably need to bring out some money because that change can take some expense. So again, for those of you who are ADA coordinators, or you missed the meeting, or you signed up voluntarily, either way, you have our utmost respect. And this is the exact reason why we're here. We want to do this with you. So again, they may not know what they were getting into, and they may not know much about resources. And oftentimes what we find is that it's like another duty is assigned in this whole list of duties. And so they have so many other hats to wear that the ADA coordination piece is really, it can be kind of daunting. Other real world things is they may simply not have a lot of experience in developing outreach to the disability community, liaisons to other departments, and all of that. So those are some things in the real world. So Michelle's going to talk to us about how important it is to involve people with disabilities in your efforts.
This is so important. Developing the resources and the disability agencies in your community, getting to know your panel members for training, who have disabilities. This is all important. I can't stress it enough. I'm a person who has a disability. I'm profoundly deaf. But I don't know all the needs of somebody who is blind. And within the range of blindness, there's a lot of different accommodations that I wouldn't know about. Having the individual themselves, whether they are the complainant, whether they're inquiring, whether they're requesting accommodations, and getting to know them is critical. I'll give you a real quick story. We had an individual who submitted a request for sign language interpreting. The individual was a drop-in participant at a senior center, and they have different things going on. They have lunches for the seniors, they have bingo, they have all different kinds of things. Well, he would come on a Tuesday and Thursday, and he said, well, I need an interpreter all day Tuesday and all day Thursday. And it was like, okay, you've been coming to the center for quite a while, what changed? And we decided that we needed a meeting because nobody seemed to be able to answer my question from the staff side as to what had changed. So we had a meeting, and wonderful, lovely gentleman, I think he was in his 80s, and we got to the question of, well, how have you been communicating? Oh, I've been communicating fine. But I said, well, what is the need for the interpreter? And he said, well, the bingo machine quit working. And so I don't know what the numbers are. And I would like to have it for the bingo game so I can participate. He said, and I said, well, what about the rest of the day? Oh, well, that's fine. We get along just fine. I just need it for the bingo game. Well, the supervisor said, we'll have that bingo machine fixed next week. No problem. So sometimes the request, you have to dig a little bit because it may not be what it is on its face. Also, we got to get to know a wonderful guest of our city who is hilarious and fun and 80 years old and participating in programs and not isolated. So, that is so important. Nothing about us without us. Next slide. Public input. You'll notice that there's some, go back one. Yeah, there we go. There's some numbers at the bottom of your screen there. 28 CFR 35.105D1. Those are critical. You need those numbers, and that is your justification. That is how you convince people, hey, I've got the law behind me here. We have to require public input. We have to get people's opinions on what we're doing. And it's not just in a city council meeting. This is in everything we do. Cities have a lot of different ways to get public input, and sadly, most don't necessarily work for people with disabilities. When we're talking about getting input, yes, we can use our commissions, we can use our disability advisory groups. There's some vocal advocates in every community, but it's more than that. It's doing things that make it easy for people with disabilities to participate. One of the things we do in Tempe is we have a public involvement plan, or we call them PIPs. Basically, what they are is where we set out how we're going to get involved with other different communities and stakeholders when we're doing something. If you can go to the website on tempe.gov/ADA, and under the ADA transition plan, if you scroll down to the bottom, there is a public involvement plan that we used in regarding our ADA transition plan. And you'll see one of the things we did, and this is really valuable, is we went out to the different agencies. You can have an open house and say, hey, here's our plan. What do you think? You get 2 people to show up, okay? Because transportation's a barrier. The energy level that's needed sometimes to go from home to another facility is difficult. But if you go to them, you go to the Center for the Blind, you go to a senior housing unit or senior housing complex that's specifically for people who are deaf, and you give your presentation, oh man, the feedback you get is awesome. So it's really important to reach out and to have your folks that will support this from your community. Nanette?
The numbers that we were talking about here in this slide, you're going to see a few of these slides throughout, and we're not going to go through everyone. Part of the reason is we have a limited amount of time to go through a lot of information, but we want to make sure you have this, and I think you'll have access to the PowerPoint itself at some point. So I wanted to kind of preface that. I want to talk about training. We're going to talk about a lot more in terms of the different aspects of this, but training is so important. At a bare minimum, training your staff on basic disability etiquette, PC terminology, just overall awareness is so important. But at another level, think about how important it is to train your staff on what to say and what not to say. So I've seen situations where someone has called, let's say, for example, a city council office or something, and they ask for an interpreter for a council meeting in a few weeks, and the person doesn't know what to say, and so they say, I'm sorry, we don't do that, or we don't provide captioning. That's a big problem. And so again, making sure that your staff are trained at a very basic level as well as a policy level is so important. So some of the things here you can see, of course, there's in-person trainings, there's web-based trainings, there's memos, there's train the trainer. One of the things that I find really helpful, and I do this everywhere I go and everywhere I contract, and that is I send out a basic needs assessment, and it's just a basic survey to find out how much contact a person has on their job with a person with a disability, and then also what's their comfort level and where do they feel they need more training. And so that can be really helpful. I will say one thing, and we're going to be talking about policy and procedure in a little bit, so I want to bring it up now, is when we do this sort of needs assessment, especially related to training and then policy and procedure, is I recently worked with a city that the vast majority of the answers to our questions about policy and procedure for people with disabilities was, I don't know. And that's kind of scary because there was a lot of things. I mean, obviously, these are questions that are important to ask, and it's important that staff do know. And the fact that we got so many I don't knows really told us how much training is needed for this particular city. So again, can't say enough how important that is. Again, this would be training all new employees. So if it's a new employee orientation, I think at a bare minimum, there needs to be some awareness training for the new employee orientation. What I tell our staff is even if you don't remember everything I'm saying, you need to remember that I'm here as a resource for you. Again, basics overview, there's supervisory level, there's making sure you have accessible documents, incidental training. If something happens, make sure that you use it as a training opportunity. So, and now, of course, the ADA coordinator. That's an important piece. Michelle's going to talk about that.
Which, Nanette already told the joke, you missed the meeting, so you were appointed. So a lot of times, the ADA coordinator is one of many other duties as assigned. And if you're fortunate, you're just the ADA coordinator. Now, I laughed at that, at the just, right? We've got a lot going on. Next slide. The regulations for the ADA coordinator, you can go take a look at those, and it's just basically dealing with knowing it's a point of contact. It's the person that's the point of contact. And then who has to appoint an ADA coordinator? Cities, states, counties. Some places have parishes. Um, governmental entities are required to have an ADA coordinator. A lot of large businesses now are using ADA coordinators. And the skill sets of an ADA coordinator is you have to be everything to everybody. That's the easiest way to put it. But basically, having an overall working knowledge of ADA, and you can get that at those sites that we're getting the links from, and knowing how to work with people. It's about collaboration. It's about negotiation. We negotiated to have sign language interpreter at bingo. We didn't need it for the whole day, So working with different groups, being comfortable working with different groups. Next slide. And then you have a lot of different responsibilities. I think the biggest responsibility is to your public. Okay, so yes, you have to make sure your facilities are accessible, your policies are in line, your notices are out, you investigate the complaints, you handle the inquiries, you do referrals for different services. But most importantly, you're working with the people who matter to that jurisdiction. I'm working for the people in Tempe. I am serving the people in Tempe to make sure that they can interact with their government, that they can participate in governance. And that, more than anything, is the most important part. Next. You can't do this by yourself. And Nanette, I think you're going to take it up from here, right?
It's okay. No, we are absolutely in agreement. You cannot do this by yourself. We already said it takes a village. This is an important piece. Again, remember that your primary job is to essentially find what's wrong and to make recommendations. That can make you a fairly unpopular person. The more you work with other essentially ADA liaisons, and we'll talk about that in a second, I think also the training can help because you're helping people understand not just what you have to do, but why you have to do it. Those are all really important pieces. One person should not do this alone. Again, coordinated effort. And one of the things I want to say about this team approach is I do think that there are different approaches to how you request something. So I know of people who, when something is out of compliance, they will come after you like a bulldog and threaten to sue you and take it very personal. You violated my civil rights. And that scare tactic isn't the most effective way to cultivate trust within your team. So you want to make sure that you are coming across as diplomatic, as flexible as possible. And I think that's just an important piece overall for the job. I think in some cases, certainly you have to have a great deal of knowledge, but I truly think that your ability to work with others, to negotiate, to problem solve together, to collaborate, I think that's one of the most important pieces. So if you have a liaison, and this is the idea, is that you would have liaisons, at least 1 to maybe 2 people in each department. And those would be people who, there might be a variety of reasons why they're chosen. In some cases, they volunteer. In some cases, people seem to sort of naturally go to them if they have a question. But anyway, 1 to 2 people in each department. They have access to the programs and services. They're going to know the internal programs and services better than the ADA coordinator oftentimes. So police department, fire department, library, there's all these different departments, and they know their departments, they know their programs and services better than others. And so having them involved is so very important. Again, they need to make sure that they can meet regularly if possible. But then you also have ADA champions, and these are oftentimes boards and commissions, advisory boards. It is so important to have people with disabilities as a part of this. And not just people who are wheelchair users, but you want people who represent a diverse variety of disabilities. And so again, please consider how very important that is. They could themselves have a disability or be the loved ones. Again, they understand, and they understand more than it's just this is the law, but it's the right thing to do. So some sense of ownership, essentially with working with these liaison teams, I think it's important to make sure that you give them a sense of ownership. Not just that you're the ADA coordinator and you're going to tell them what to do, but that they actually have responsibilities within their own department. So again, you're the accessibility person for your department. I'm here as a resource for you. Based on your department's needs, it would be reasonable to include that this is your next budget request. So again, the liaison, this is one of the reasons why we have it visual, because I'm signing. And so if you kind of look at this sort of, you can see it, this collaborative effort, I think it's such a beautiful sign for what we're talking about here. In terms of collaborating. The ADA coordinator themselves, they agree to not do all of the work of the liaisons. They are there as a resource. They support, they guide steps, they make sure they're accountable, they're firm when necessary, again, going back to the laws. And then it's so very important that they're flexible. They take ownership of the actions, remain in contact with each of the liaison members. And then it's important that they progress, or that they track the progress. I assure you that you will never regret documenting what you're doing. That is so, so very important. The ADA liaison and the ADA coordinator also need to know when to ask for help. And please understand, Michelle kind of joked that the ADA coordinator kind of needs to be able to do everything and know everything. Michelle and I have been doing this for a really, really, really long time, and we don't know everything. We know where to go ask for help. And we know how important it is to ask others. Even though she and I may have a very broad range of knowledge in different types of disabilities, we're still going to bring in other people with various types of disabilities for our efforts, because that's so very critical. Examples of involvement here are, for example, you meet with the municipal recreation department staff when a new program is being created to make sure that there's participation for people with disabilities. Maybe you get involved in the scoping requirement for a new courthouse. Other examples are developing a housing program. Maybe you help clarify the number of units that need to be mobility and communication accessible. By the way, if you ever have any questions about Daryl Christensen, who is in this class right now, is the person to talk to about anything related to that area. And then maybe you also might sort of review a draft of the county department's mental health contract. That's a pretty broad one. And there's some ADA coordinators that will extend out a bit beyond their city, and then there's others that don't. So again, keep that in mind and don't let that scare you away altogether. So other things is making sure that you are the expert, so be the expert. And sometimes I think we don't completely feel empowered to do so. I think one of the most important pieces to the job description is that they have the administrative authority to do what needs to be done. And that's something, again, that can be difficult to do. And you can't do it when you're within one department. You really need to be more over. But one of the things we might suggest in terms of I don't want to say tactics, but in terms of communication, is to explain to people the risks are this and the benefits are this, and then help them understand why the benefits are going to far outweigh any of the costs. And the risk, I think oftentimes working with risk management can be really helpful, because a lot of times ADA and risk management can kind of go hand in hand. And if nothing else, the lawyers know what the risks oftentimes are. Speaking of lawyers, Project Civic Access, if you're not familiar with it, I would highly recommend you just do a basic search for Project Civic Access. It will scare you, but it's a fantastic program and process that really helps cities really take a good solid look at what they're doing and what they need to do. And it's something that our other cities need to be watching for, so that we can hopefully make the changes that we need to make before something like that happens. By the way, Daryl Christensen put his contact information at the bottom here. All right, so Michelle's now going to talk about providing public notice. And I apologize because we are probably going to go over our time. We're going to try to speed it up, and go, Michelle.
I will speed it up, yes. We're still working to make this one better, and this is one that you cannot do enough on. Yeah. We've included it on public meeting agendas. We've included it in brochures. There's 100 different ways to give public notice, and so that's something. Website, thank you. Social media, you can put it in just about everything. The ADA's coordinators' contact information and how they can request accommodations. There's a sample notice available. Next slide. And public notice, again, there's your numbers that you want to, you have the authority to do these things. Go ahead and, so an example is one of the things nothing is ever 100% accessible. And so, for example, in one county, they did a recreation department with 4 playgrounds, and they made 2 compliant. But the information has to be shared with the public, and that can be done on a website, that can be done in a lot of different places, brochures. Next. Sometimes you have services that are on a certain day that include sign language interpreting. It's important to get that information out, but most important also is that people who, let's say people who are deaf, if they're going to a sign interpreted tour, they're not required to go to that tour. They can go to any tour, as long as they give you notice that they need the accommodation. And so that's something that is real critical. You can't just push people into what you want them to do. Keep going. We have the grievance procedure. And I should call this the gas pump. And this is the gas pump for your ADA engine, so to speak. And the reason is that when you get a grievance, that gives you impetus to move forward to make change. When you can't make change by yourself, you can holler and yell and do all you want to do and say, hey, we need to do this. But until someone from the public says you need to do this, you're not going to get much traction on it. Keep going. There's a couple of things important with the grievance procedure is that there's some time frames involved in the ADA. You want to keep to those time frames, but you don't want to make it so detailed that, okay, you'll get a call back in 15 days. This will happen in 10 days. That'll happen in 15 days. You don't want to do that. And the reason is that some investigations take longer than others. When somebody says that something is not accessible, I may have to find out the jurisdiction information. I may have to get building plans. There's a whole bunch of things that may have to happen. So you don't want to tie your hands on that. A grievance pushes the ADA agenda, and it may deal with funding issues. One of the best things that I learned is how to ask for money. That is so important in this job, is how do you ask for money and know your processes and what you can do and when you can do them. One size doesn't fit all. You need to, your best phrase is, let me look into that. Let me see what I can do to help you. Let me make sure that I understand the problem. You know, so never say no. That's basically, at the beginning, never say no. Next. Records. Keep records. You will be asked at some point on some complaints what happened. And after you've done, a few, even, you've done 50 and you've got to go back and remember what happened, you won't. And especially as we get older, we don't. And so, documenting, oh, what happened there? Oh, yes, okay, this is what happened. Now I remember. That is so critical. Next.
All right. So your self-evaluation. Keep in mind that when we talk about a self-evaluation, there's a lot of different things to look at. This is not just buildings and facilities, although that's what a lot of these slides are going to reference. So again, self-evaluation, you can see we're looking at policies, practices, procedures, again, effective communication. There's all these things that are involved. And so it's important to evaluate them, identify steps, and determine timelines. So overall, again, looking at every different aspect, you might, for example, have non-discrimination provisions. You got to look at communication, program accessibility, facility accessibility. So what Michelle was just talking about in terms of like 4 playgrounds and 2 of them are accessible. Eventually those other 2 need to become accessible, especially if they're a distance away, because you don't want someone to have to travel far, especially if communication or if transportation can be an issue. You don't want them to have to travel to another park that's farther away because their local one isn't accessible. But that program accessibility is the piece that helps that communication so they know what to expect. And then website accessibility is sort of all the rage right now, so definitely need help with that. Who does all this? Well, there's the ADA coordinator, and they absolutely cannot truly cannot do all of this by themselves. They really need a team. So they have their team, they hopefully have their liaisons. In some cases, they need to collaborate with other contractors also. So they're going to be asking a lot of questions. What's their area of concern? What do you think your department needs? That's where that sort of needs assessment comes in. Doing an evaluation, sending a basic evaluation link for the different policies and procedures, the training needs, and then sending them out within your not just your departments, within your entities, your municipalities, to get a better idea. So you have the self-evaluation, and then you have the action plans. And I think about this in terms of a map. I was thinking about this the other day in terms of how it's such a journey. And I looked at a roller coaster, but that always takes you back to where you are, and you really need to get somewhere else. So a lot of times people don't even know that there is such a place, the land of inclusion, for example. They don't know. And the discovery of it can be both exciting and daunting. So people say, I really want to be the ADA coordinator. And then they get into it and they go, oh my gosh, there was so much more than what I realized. And the truth is that when you start looking at all these AR this and that, you think maybe it's completely different language. And yes, some of us do seem to speak a different language. So you sometimes need help deciphering that secret language. And again, that's what these resources are about. The ADA self-evaluation is essentially your secret decoder glasses so that you can see where you really are. And I have that in a capital R because I cannot tell you how often Michele and I and many of us hear, oh no, we're accessible or we're compliant. I want to tell you now that if you have a website that says that you have a compliant building, you should probably take that word off. You could say accessible maybe, but I would not use the word compliant. Would you, Michele? Because
No.
the chances that you are very slim, and I'm not trying to sound negative, but just be really careful. So again, that's what the evaluation is. Often a guide is needed to help you. Go ahead, Michele.
I could jump in real quick. One thing is that it may be compliant or accessible today, but all it takes is somebody to move something and now it's no longer compliant.
Right.
Go ahead, Nanette.
Here's another example too. So the ADA says that there is a requirement for how wide and how deep a restroom stall is for like a wheelchair accessible stall. And that may be compliant, but in some cases it's not accessible for a person who uses a scooter, and the depth of that is greater. So even though it's compliant, it's not accessible to that person. In the same way, you could have something that a person could reach, they can handle, it's accessible to them, but technically it's not compliant. So I don't want you to think those words are synonymous, because they're not necessarily. This is one of the reasons why you often need a guide to help you on your journey, but you're going to learn a lot from them, and we hope you're going to learn a lot through this process. So these are just some basic examples of just some of the slides I've taken out in the field. Everything has to be looked at. A bathroom, by the way, like 80 questions minimum for a bathroom, a single user bathroom. Again, everything has to be looked at, everything has to be documented, and yes, you spend a lot of time in bathrooms, a lot of time in bathrooms. The information has to be very organized, it has to be easy to follow. Unfortunately, sometimes it can be very daunting. And so having it put into a format that you can easily read through is helpful. And what I would suggest is, I've seen a lot of places and they will specifically document what's wrong, but I personally would encourage you to document what's right also, because you're going to have to go through the questions. So either way, you got to kind of look at the question, you got to determine, is it compliant or not? And as long as you're doing that, document that it is, because if someone comes back and says, this is wrong, and you look back and go, wait a second, when we did our evaluation, it was right, you have documentation of that. You also then can kind of push your case that if anything changes, you need to be in the loop on that to make sure that it's done right. I think videos can be helpful, by the way. This is something that's helpful. If it's how fast the door closes, or is it an auto closing stall door, those are some things that you need to kind of see visually. Again, sometimes the information can be really overwhelming. And so one of the things that I find helpful is to have kind of an organized complexity and priority level. So here's some examples. You might have something that is very easy to fix, like replacing a doorknob with handles, installing handles on both sides of stall doors, lack of parking signage, sink pipes that need installation, a sink cover height. These are all fairly easy to fix. I personally could probably do most of these. And in some cases, they're also really high priority. So you could have a bathroom that is unbelievably accessible, compliant, it's perfect, best practice, but you have a doorknob. That means that a lot of people aren't going to actually be able to get into that bathroom. So again, some of these things would be considered a higher priority because of that. Anything that would be a safety hazard. If you have protruding objects, those are going to be the highest priority because, again, someone could really get hurt. So again, this is just some examples of some of the different things. Again, you can see things that are a high priority, that are not a high priority, but they're kind of easy to fix. Like if a mirror is not at 40 inches, it's not that a person couldn't go to the restroom and wash their hands. It's just that they maybe can't see their whole head, but that's not a huge priority. It still needs to be done though. And so again, that's where that can be helpful to distinguish them. Other things, a center line of the toilet that is way too far from the wall, that's a much higher priority. Restriping a parking lot to ensure compliant measurements. Some people would think that's not a high priority, but if you've been in Arizona long, you know that there was a rash of lawsuits where people were Googling down onto parking lots, easily finding that things were not compliant, and then they were slapping lawsuits on them. So that is important. These are all important. It's just that, again, there's different priority levels. Again, if the center line of the toilet is at 18.5 and it's supposed to be between 16 and 18, it still needs to be done, but it maybe isn't as high a priority as if it was 20 inches from the center line or from the wall. Again, other things maybe that the stalls are not quite deep enough, not quite wide enough. Again, these are just some examples that we have here. And hopefully this is helpful for you. I would say anytime that you have issues with slope or cross slope that are pretty significant, where a person literally going along a sidewalk could tip or could roll down or really struggle to go up, those are again a higher priority. Sometimes things are considered technically infeasible. You will never make that decision on your own. This is one property we looked at years ago where they were trying to put a lift around this spa and there was literally no room at all. But again, you're rarely going to find things like that. So you've got your evaluation, you have your transition plan. That's what we're going to talk about, because essentially the Department of Justice says this is where you need to be. And you think, oh, I'm right here. But then when you do your evaluation, you realize you're really more about here. And so your transition plan is, how do I go from here, self-evaluation, to here where the Department of Justice says I need to be? This action is your transition plan. And it's not something that happens quickly. The evaluation itself is going to take time. And then the transition plan itself, when you actually have everything organized and ready, that can take 3 years, 5 years, sometimes longer. One of the reasons why I think it's helpful to take a look at things in terms of complexity and priority is because a lot of times people say, well, we're going to get to that next year when we remodel that bathroom. Okay, but you know what? You could quickly lower that paper towel dispenser. You could quickly, really important, change the doorknob to a door lever. Regardless of any other modifications that are happening later on, there's things that you can and should do as soon as possible. And it also helps you show progress on your transition plan. So you're showing that. The journey, by the way, is not going to be easy at all. And you really should not take this journey alone. You're going to find a lot of people, a lot of resources on the way. They're going to help you with the secret decoder stuff. They're going to help you understand where you're at and where you're going and how to get there. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, we already kind of explained that this is sort of the process. Be patient. You need to continue your efforts, even though it's going to take some time. And it can be exhausting, but it is worth it. All right. So we kind of talked about the transition plan and what that means. Again, having a really good set of organized data about what is compliant and what is not compliant, and then what are the areas. One of the reasons why it's helpful to have something really organized is because if you have a list of, we have, let's just say we have 300 grab bars that need to be replaced or installed. It's helpful to be able to organize that so that when you're going for budgeting, you know, you need the money to fix this, you can give them a clear number of how many you need. It helps with short-term planning, long-range planning. So some examples here, and I know that this is very hard to see, but this would be an example of what a transition plan might look like, where you have a specific number that goes back to the report. You have what the specific question was in regards to what is the ADA requiring, what the answer was, pictures to help document that, what the ADA code is. And then what you can do is you can start to kind of go through and organize, okay, how many things do I have that are a high priority and they're pretty easy to fix? Those are things you want to do first. The things that are a high priority, but they are going to be complicated to fix, you need to start budgeting for those quickly. Being able to determine, okay, how many grab bars do I need? How many plumbing fixtures do I need to fix? It's really easy to cover the grab or the pipes under a sink with some foam to make them safer. Who is assigned to each of these events? Again, these are some things. A calendar of events, a Gantt chart that shows you the progress of what's being done and what needs to be done. And then again, this is something I find helpful, is putting together what I call kind of a dashboard, and that is being able to see everything in kind of one swoop. Where are we at with each area here? In terms of the budget, in terms of how many different items that we have, in terms of what's been completed, what's being reviewed, what's not going to be completed. Again, those types of things are helpful. So a lot of information. Again, that's just one example. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and that really kind of focused a little bit more on the facility part. But remember how very important it is to also take a look at your website, your communication, your grievance procedure, and that's where Michele is going to continue on with our action plan.
An action plan is basically how you're going to get there. It's good to know what needs to be fixed, but how you're going to get there, when it's going to happen in the budget. But it's not, as Nanette said, it's not just your facilities. Programs, services, activities, events, you've got meetings, you've got communication. All of these things need an action plan to tell how you're going to get from one state of accessibility to another. And this is a living document. It just helps to have it available because it also is a defense. Both the transition plan and your action plans are a defense should you get a charge of discrimination from a federal entity. If DOJ comes and says that, we want to know, we got a complaint, we want to know what you're doing, these documents become legal defenses. And so that is one of the things that's really helpful.
Hey, Michele?
Yes.
So real quick, I want to tell just a quick example of that. So again, I told you how valuable it can be to go to these ADA conferences. One of the first ones I went to, we had a representative from the Department of Justice. They're the ones that do that Project Civic Access. And they choose their city based on a variety of things, demographics, complaints, things like that. And so they were kind of looking for their next city to come after. And I hope that doesn't come across wrong, but they were looking for their next city. And they received a complaint from a resident at a city. They called the city and they asked for their ADA coordinator. It's really, really important that instead of that person who answered the phone, anybody who, it could have been anybody, but the person who answered the phone didn't say, our what? Our ADA who? Hey, do you know what they're talking about? Oh yeah, it's that disability person. That did not happen. They said, by all means, here's her name, here's her phone number, and I'm going to transfer you now. That's really, really important. If you don't have a designated ADA coordinator, even if that's not their sole title, everybody in your city needs to know who that is and to transfer them to them. So they then were transferred to the ADA coordinator, and they said, this is so-and-so with the Department of Justice. We received a complaint about this item. Are you aware of this? Their ADA coordinator, brilliant person, said, hold on just a moment, let me get that for you. I've got our transition plan right here. Hang on, let me see. Oh yeah, I see it right here. It's this item, and you know what? It's on our calendar to fix the third quarter of next year. But if someone's got a complaint, by all means, we'll bump that up and we'll have it taken care of by this next quarter. So the Department of Justice said, great, you've essentially got your act together, and that was it. They thanked them, they hung up, and at that point, the Department of Justice moved on. They would have potentially started Project Civic Access with that city. But the fact that the ADA coordinator was able to show that they had done an evaluation, they had a transition plan, they had a schedule, and that when someone in the public brings a topic to them, that it bumps up in the priority level, that saved them. The question was asked by Liz, and that is, how often do we do a self-evaluation or update the transition plan? I know a lot of cities who have them on the shelf from 1995 or so. I would say if you're not actively working on one, you need to have one because it's not a process that you do and then you're done. So if you had one done 5 years ago, you would remember that, and you're probably still working on the transition plan. So I wanted to answer that question and also bring that up. Michele, I appreciate you kind of letting me jump in real quick.
Absolutely. Next slide. One of the things that the action plan, you can see all the different things it covers. Next slide. And there's a lot of different examples. You can take a look at those. I think one of the biggest things that I found is that contracts make accommodations easy. If you have a contract with a sign language interpreting company, you have a contract with a company that can do your 508 PDFs, if you have a contract with a company that provides Braille, it makes it so much easier because then you know, okay, we can do this, call this person, get it done. When it comes to a lot of your examples as well, it's going to be about collaboration and negotiation. It's always a collaborative process. Next slide, you'd be amazed at some of the requests for accommodations and what they're looking for. I'm surprised every day. And then there's new technology out there that we didn't have a year ago that can be used for accommodation. There's automatic captioning equipment. There's all kinds of different things. Next slide. We have, you already talked about it, don't let it be a shelf document. You can make it lively. One of the things we did is we put our ADA transition plan in a GIS format. So you can go to tempe.gov/ADA, look at the ADA story map, and it's a wonderful, wonderful GIS interactive map of Tempe that shows where all of our problems are. And we had a lot of discussions on, do we put this out there? And it's like, yes, we're an open city. We're definitely putting it out there. But you can see where the curb ramps are that need to be fixed and how much it's going to fix them. You can see the sidewalks that have slope issues and where, how much it's going to take to fix it. By putting it out there, we're also letting the public know, we're working on these things. And so, being strategic, tracking, all of that is a tracking mechanism. We're not trying to change you can't change a city overnight. Next slide. If being strategic, it's like turning a big boat. It's not turning a little, board. And so one of the things I like to equate it to is that we're moving a river. Tempe makes waves in the desert. I have to get our tagline in there. We make waves in the desert. We have a beautiful Tempe lake. And, so we moved a river. We made a lake out of it. And so understanding program access, let's take that, next slide. Program access, what does it mean? It doesn't mean what you think it means. Some people think that, we can get a wheelchair in here, we can squeeze them in. That's not program access. Some folks think, I'm just the person who cleans the building. I don't have public contact. Yes, you do. You need to know if somebody asks you, can you move that trash can because it's blocking the clearance space for a doorway, why it's important. Okay, you do have public contact. Next slide. Program access, basically you can't deny the benefits. Everybody should be able to participate. Next slide. I'm speeding through. We're speeding through here. There's your numbers. I love my numbers. There's your justification. When you need to make changes, you have the law behind you. It's also not every facility has to be accessible. That's the easy way to do it. But if you have to move a class into another building to make it accessible, then relocate it. The issue comes in when, oh, okay, this is a pottery class. We can't move the kiln. So it's real important to know your operations, or your ADA liaisons to know their operations, what things are movable, what not. Next. It's about how the person experiences what's going on. We have equality, we have equity. There's universal design takes it to the next step. I'll leave that there. Next slide. When we're talking about universal accessibility, it's usable by all. And that is a place where we're headed. You know, that's where we want to go, to where it's usable by all. Next. Equal treatment, that is a whole different scenario, okay? There's times when a person comes up and they'll start to say, oh, I need an accommodation, and the nonverbal language of somebody will say, oh, you're a problem. I've had it happen many times, you know, and I'm profoundly deaf and I need different things in order to participate. And they're getting better at that. They're getting, you know, it's just something that you have to deal with, and I make those learning opportunities, you know. I put on my humor hat, I do have one, and kind of make a joke out of it, but they get the message really quick that this is not appropriate. Keep going. Integrations. I want to participate. I don't want to be off in a separate program. I don't want to be off where it's only, you know, the people who have disabilities are in this program. I want to participate with everyone. Next slide. Oh, I need to talk about the civil rights part real quick. Civil rights are always personal, okay? When I can't participate, it's personal. It is about my ability to engage in governing. It's about my ability to engage in recreation. If I can't, it is personal, and that civil rights are personal. And so that's where, you know, Nanette mentioned sometimes people get really angry about it. Yeah, we do. Because it is personal. When I can't take my husband to a movie theater because they don't have accessible parking spaces, or enough accessible parking spaces, he uses a wheelchair, we have to go home. It doesn't feel good, you know, so it is personal. Who pays? Who pays for the accessibility part? The city or the jurisdiction pays. And if you need to bump up the rates for everybody in order to cover the cost, you do so. There's a lot of different paying mechanisms. There's a lot of different funding mechanisms. Some are grants, some are, you know, you rearrange your budget. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Next. Exceptions. These are really hard to prove, just so you know. Direct threat to health and safety. Changing the fundamental nature of a program. There's some analysis that you go through in order to determine these exceptions. It's not just somebody says, oh, I don't think I can do it, so therefore it's an exception. There's an analysis that has to go, you know, that you go through. That'll be an ADA 102. Next. Program access. For example, this example, they had a blind individual, an individual who is blind who couldn't tell the difference between the two trash cans. One is for recycle, one is for not. And so an example of an accommodation was they glued a penny to the lid so that you could feel the difference. But then they went back and they said, well, that's not a real technical thing. And so they found out that the trash can manufacturers already had lids that have braille and raised text and symbols. And so sometimes it just takes somebody to ask before you find out, oh, we do have a good solution for that. And next. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nanette.
One of the things I wanted to point out when Michelle's talking about funding is a lot of times the department will not have any idea how much they need to set aside. A lot of times the requests and where the most money comes in oftentimes is for, like, for example, communication accommodations, an interpreter or cart. And so you don't ever want a department to say, I'm sorry, but we don't have that in our budget. So one possibility is, again, if the ADA coordinator has this administrative authority in general over the city, and if they have their own pool of money for ADA accommodations, for example, then when any of these other departments get a request for an accommodation, it's going to go directly to the ADA coordinator, who makes sure that they have the money again, and then they can assist in paying for these. What it also means is that they help keep track then of, we seem to get a lot of requests from the recreation department or the library department or whatever it is. So then at the end of the fiscal year or whatever, when you're planning your budgets again, they know that that particular department needs to contribute more to that ADA pool. I hope that makes sense. Again, you don't ever want to say, I'm sorry, we just don't have the money for this. That's pretty important. So what we hope is, we want to know what's one thing that you're going to do this week. Obviously, you being here is fantastic. It's a really great start, and it says a lot about your openness and your proactive effort to learn more about what's required. I just saw that Louis Krause from the Pacific ADA Center here. For those, I'll just read this to you real quick. It says, for confidential answers to your questions on the ADA, the Pacific ADA Center is the regional source of information and training on the ADA. You can reach the Pacific ADA Center and it gives you have the information here. Again, keep in mind that they're here as a resource for you. I think sometimes what happens is that people are sort of afraid to call the Department of Justice. I've experienced this myself in the past also, where the organization says, no, don't call them, because then they'll know that we don't have our stuff together. And nobody has their stuff together, I assure you. Or some people are afraid to call because they don't want to sound stupid. But I assure you that these organizations are here as a resource for you. And so what's pretty exciting is, again, you have the Access Board, they wrote the law, you have the Department of Justice, but you also have the Pacific ADA, or you have the ADA centers in general, but our local one, our regional one, is the Pacific ADA Center. So you have a person right here, you have their number, you have their website. And again, one of the things that Louis and I were talking about before this conference, in fact, was talking about us working together with Pacific ADA and our coalition to kind of team up in terms of resources. So that's an incredible opportunity for us to learn for some real experts that have a lot of really great resources. So we hope that you will then take a look at your transition plan if you don't have one. In fact, that was one of the questions that we received, is how often should we get one? So we have one city, they did their transition plan in 2015. They're not sure if they should update it. Essentially, they're wondering if, as we grow, should we aim to perform a complete reassessment of all facilities programs right away, or would it be better to focus on assessing facilities programs as they are built or become available? So again, that's one of the questions. Michelle, what would you think? If they did this in 2015. So my guess is that if you did this in 2015, you have a transition plan, and hopefully you are still in the process of completing items on your transition plan.
A transition plan is a time document. So you have to indicate on your transition plan when you're going to fix things. Just going back and making sure that you've done what you said you wanted to do, yes. That is valuable. Things happen. It may take longer to fix something. There's a concrete shortage. There's a contract that didn't come through that was supposed to fix something. The plans got delayed. There's all kinds of things that happen when you're talking about facilities and you're talking about fixing things. I've yet to see one plan that is, that's been reviewed and it's supposed to go forward in a certain manner, and it actually ends up on time. Getting things on time is difficult, and so going through the transition plan, making sure that the things that need to be done have been done, or that you know where they are. Are they on track? Are they not on track? It's not an easy process. There's always something to do. And even if it's just trying to keep up on research, trying to keep up with your community members. We have Ability 360. Daryl Christensen has put his website up there. There's a lot of different resources that are out there. On Tempe's website, we have Access Tempe, which is still in beta form, but there's 80 different disability organizations on that website. We're going to be updating that so that it's actually usable on phones. Right now, it's on an old platform that's only usable on computers. So, but there's 90 different organizations, 80 different organizations on that. That if you need to know who do I contact for people to get some advice from people who are blind, from people who are deaf, whatever, it's on there. There's resources for caregiving. There's our world is huge, so there's always something to do.
We're showing here the final slide. Again, these are some of the ones that were we were put together by Shannon, and so we did update some of these. But again, we definitely want to make sure that you guys know about the adapacific.org. By the way, they're going to have a conference in September. So if you go to their website, you'll find there's a tremendous number of resources. And I know I say this at every one of our monthly ADA coalition meetings, but there are some fantastic resources out there with online training. There's a lot of archive training you can look through and say specifically. I know we have some people online here that are from venues. And so you can look specifically to see what does the ADA say about large venues or areas of assembly. So whatever the specifics are, there's so many topics there that we hope you guys will go to. Now, I want to make sure if there's any other questions that come in, I think you can put them in it looks like we have in the chat pod. Oh, fantastic. So, Holly, I'm glad that you guys are here. Keep in mind that we're likely going to do this more often. If there are specific topics that you're interested in, what we'll probably do is send out that needs assessment that I talk about. We'll probably send that out, find out a little bit more about what some of your most pressing matters are. Again, Pacific ADA has said that they would love to work with us on providing some training also. Again, please keep in mind there are so many wonderful archived trainings that you can go into and learn more. Michelle and I are both available. Let me make sure you've got my email address here. And my fingers are frozen all of a sudden. There we go. So you have my email address. Feel free to email me if you have any questions also. And then again, we have our meetings every month. So one of the things that we're really trying to do with our meetings is the first portion of the meeting, we have a segment that's educational related. So for example, we had Michelle Michaels from the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing come and talk and demonstrate FM systems. And so we meet physically at the ADDPC office. That's the Arizona Developmental Disability Planning Council, and they're a fantastic partner with us. So we have our live meeting there, and we'll have our presenters there. And so even if you can't physically be there, we hope that you can at least chime in via the webcam. But then the very end of the meeting, and I think this is a really valuable piece, is the end of the meeting, we have a problem solving portion. And that's where if you have a question, sometimes people are a little bit nervous about emailing the question over, and rightfully so, because especially as government agencies, everything is discoverable, and sometimes you just want to ask a question. So first off, you're more than welcome to call Michelle or myself or other coalition members, but this is also a good opportunity to come to the coalition with a question. We never want someone's specific name. But if you want to come with a question, we found it to be really helpful to do some sort of group problem solving, and have found that it's been helpful for others in terms of finding some solutions they might not have been aware of or thought about before that. Any final questions, comments? I've got a question here. It says, I'm thinking of faith-based organizations who are seeking buildings. This would be a great thing for them to jump on and be aware as they scope out buildings. You know, it's interesting because technically faith-based organizations, they don't have to comply with the ADA so much, but they do have to comply with building codes. But if they're open to the public, which they obviously are, or maybe they do have a daycare center, they rent out their building to others. Those are all important things. So I have to say, for me personally, if somebody asks me if that faith-based building needs to comply, I say yes. it's a best practice. It's absolutely a best practice. And so, Louis, do you want to jump in on that? I don't think you'll have mic ability necessarily, but feel free if you know a resource or if you want to chime in on that. Again, I would just say best practices they need to. And again, consider building codes say that the building codes are already going to mention a lot of that anyways. So we have the website, by the way, for the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing that we mentioned earlier that's up there. Are there any other questions at all? And what I would say is, those of you who are on here, you can go over to the side of your name, I think, and I think you can put a check mark, or how do you do that? Oh, I know. Up at the very top left, there is a little hand that's up, and you can click agree. If you are not currently a part of our ADA Coordinator Coalition and you want to be, if you want to raise your hand and say you want to be, hopefully we should have your email. We'll have your email because when you signed up for the class, this webinar, you had to give your email. So again, if you're not already getting our emails about the monthly meetings that we have and you want to, please, again, just raise your hand or email Michelle and I, whichever. But we'll go ahead and we'll add you to the list. Again, I already explained, I do not send that out to anybody. Our next meeting, if you would want to put that on a calendar, save the date, is we always meet the second Wednesday of every month. And we meet from about 10 to 11:30 or so. Again, you can physically come into the meeting room itself. We meet on 3rd Street in Brown Indian School, or you can come in online. We do like a webcast. It looks like Luis is saying he agrees. Mostly the issue is if you're providing services or programs to the public, but the question is great to ask. Again, there's where the 1-800 number is to call and ask the question. Again, please, you guys don't feel silly at all about asking questions. It really is kind of like a different language, and it really is sort of like trying to find a treasure on a old map that can be difficult to maneuver if you're not familiar with it. So I commend you guys for being here. Michelle, any final comments?
This has been an awesome opportunity, and if there's any questions that you think of after the fact, which is usually what happens to me, we would definitely open to just shoot us an email, and we'll see what we can do to help.